Good morning, and I welcome those who are watching by live stream. I want to check, can you hear me okay in the back? Just wave your arms. Yes? Good. Thank you. It's great to welcome you this morning. Like many of you, I grew up in a Christian home, which meant I also learned other kinds of ethics like manners, respecting our elders, and then from Sunday school and from my parents learned the lessons of Jesus, where I learned about doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, and turn the other cheek. And one time I asked my mother, what is it about forgiveness? Is it how many times again? 7 times? Because I remembered that's what Peter asked. Seemed like a lot to me as a boy. She said, no, 70 times 7. Okay. And in the middle of that upbringing, then we all went off to school. And what we learned was that not every child who we ended up with in our classroom necessarily was taught those same lessons. I learned this by way of a boy named Billy Brown. Billy Brown was the local bully. Somehow he knew that about my upbringing because he chose me for his sport. For the first few weeks of 2nd grade, I got a daily beating from Billy Brown. Somehow, through some sixth sense that bullies have, he knew how to find me after school. I went this way and that way, but he always seemed to find me and give me my daily beating. Along that way, then, I suggested this to my older brothers, and they wanted to give me another kind of teaching, another kind of ethical framework, and that is, if he hits you, hit him back harder. Take him down. You're one of us. Sissies do not let people hit them. That was another kind of ethical framework. So the next time Billy Brown found me and was going to give me my daily beating, I grabbed him. And what he and I learned on the way down to the ground was that I was stronger than he was. Second thing I noticed was that as I had him on the ground, some of my Christian teaching was vanishing. And I balled up my fist and I socked him in the nose. The next thing I noticed was that there was a stream of blood coming out of his nose. And I hate to admit this on live stream and before you, but it was the prettiest red that I think I've ever seen. While I was holding him down, my Christian character came back to some degree, and I said to Billy Brown, if you say Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, I'll let you up. That wasn't necessarily my best Christian moment, but he did stop. I let him up. And you know what? Billy Brown never touched me again. Do you have any enemies? Billy Brown was my enemy. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, Luke's version for our gospel text this morning, love your enemies. Do good to those who do you wrong. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. You and I want to go, come again? Excuse me? Do you live in the real world, Jesus of Nazareth? Do you know how hard that is to love your enemies, to do good to those who do you wrong, to bless those who curse you, and to pray for those who abuse you? Jesus was teaching us about another ethic. You'll remember that in Matthew's version of the Sermon on the Mount, that Jesus begins this portion of his teaching by saying, you remember of old, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Jesus was calling upon an old ethic that had been handed him by his Hebrew tradition. What did the Hebrews discover? Enzo is Enzo's going to come back for his baptism. Maybe, if Mom decides. Jesus was recalling an old ethic. The ethic before an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth in their society was what ethicists would call unlimited retaliation. Unlimited retaliation would be, if you kill my cat, I'm going to kill your cat and your dog and all of your livestock, and I'm going to kill you too. What they discovered is if that continued to be the prominent ethic, there would be nobody left. They would all do each other in with unlimited retaliation. And so they came along and said there needs to be a better ethic, what we would call limited retaliation. If you take my eye out, then I get to take your eye out. If you kill my cow, I get to kill your cow. One for one. You see how that works. And there's a lot of people in our world who still ascribe to this kind of tit for tat, one for one ethic. In fact, some cultures see this as justice. Jesus then came along and, beginning in the Sermon on the Mount, begins to usher forth a new ethic. Not unlimited retaliation, not limited retaliation, and he even calls forth another ethic that had been introduced in his society by his own community, and that is, I call upon you to love your neighbor and you can hate your enemy. Jesus is echoing this in today's gospel text. That is, it's ethically right to love your neighbor and, oh yes, and you can hate your enemy. Jesus finds that limiting, of course, that limiting love. Love is limited when we only love those who are like us, our neighbor. Because what happens with that ethic is you and I only then love the people who are like us, who look like us, who live like we do, who are part of our denomination, who are our skin color, our gender, our orientation. You see where this goes, don't you? Jesus knew that this limited love was going to limit them down in terms of the full vision of God's love. If we only love those who are like us, who are pleasing to us, we would say our hood or our denomination or our people, then we've limited how God's love is to be exercised in the world. Jesus calls attention to this in today's gospel text. I have another ethic, Jesus seems to be saying to us. I want you to love your enemies. Do good to those who do you wrong. Bless those who curse you. And I want you to pray for those who abuse you. It's a tall order, isn't it? This new ethic Jesus gives us. We want to ask him again, do you really think this is doable this side of heaven? This loving our enemy, doing good to those who do us wrong, blessing those who curse us. How do we do it? We would ask Jesus. By calling upon God's grace, beginning in baptism, which we begin for 3 people today, where we hear again in that baptismal covenant that you and I are to respect the dignity of every human being. Yes, Jesus would say, even your enemy. We swallow hard at that part of the baptismal covenant. We know that we're a long way from living into this full ethic, this agape love that has no conditions, regardless of how we were treated. Now let me underscore and be quick to add, Jesus is not asking us to become a doormat where we let the Billy Browns of the world just beat us up all the time. No, there's boundaries around this about health and wholeness and love. Love for you, love for neighbor, love for stranger, love for enemy. In 1963, New Orleans was trying to work out this business of getting along, of loving people who are different from themselves. They were court-ordered to integrate their schools. The African American community was afraid. The white community was just enraged. They were not doing well. All of the parents in all the neighborhoods decided not to send their children to school that fall, except one family, the Bridges family. Mrs. Bridges said to her daughter Ruby, who was 7 years old, "You will be going to school this fall," and she took her to her school. Beginning that September, Ruby Bridges was the only student to go to that school. Every morning at 10 minutes to 8, she walked out of a federal building with 2 U.S. Marshals on her front and 2 U.S. Marshals on her back. And she walked through a rageful, cursing, spitting crowd who called her everything in the book. This sweet 7-year-old child with these nice dresses her mother made, beautiful bows in her hair, just because she was black, for heaven's sake. But she walked peacefully, resolutely, every single day into her classroom, did her studies as she was instructed, and then in the afternoon, those same U.S. Marshals escorting her back. Well, there was a psychiatrist at Harvard named David Miller. Robert Coles. David Miller was his colleague. Robert Coles, the psychiatrist from Harvard, then decided he needed to go to New Orleans and to discover what it is that causes a little girl to be able to love her enemies like that. So he went to New Orleans and did research for a couple months. He went to Ruby Bridges' mother and said, "Mrs. Bridges, how is it that Ruby has this moral fiber in her?" She said, "Oh, that's easy. She's learned the lessons of Jesus in Sunday school." "Do you know about those ethics?" she asked Dr. Robert Coles. "Yes," he said, "actually. I've learned it at my own Episcopal church." Mrs. Bridges then said, "Ruby is able to walk through those crowds because she knows she's loved, and she knows that she's a child of God, and she knows that this is the right thing to do. It's the way of Jesus." After Robert Coles learned that about Ruby Bridges, he and his colleague, Dr. Miller, began to write a book called The Moral Life of Children. In that book, they talk about what it is to love the enemy and to do good to those who do us wrong, to bless those who curse us, and to pray for those who abuse us. What Robert Coles decided to do was, in his own practice, he would begin to receive patients who were having trouble with their enemies, who were rageful and had a hard time with their anger. He would bring them in, and he would have a therapy session. And what he would do is, in a baptismal form, he would say, "I want you to imagine a body of water. And in that body of water, I want you to put your enemies and put yourself also in the body of water." "How big is the water?" he would ask his patients. And some of them would say, "My water is as big as an ocean, and my enemies are all the way on the other side of the hemisphere. And I'm over on this side, and I never want to see them again." He would begin to work with those patients. Others would say, "My water is a big lake, and my enemies are way over there. I cannot see their faces. I do not want to see their faces, and I'm over here." And as Robert Coles began to work with them, they began to see the depths of the way that love works. He would have them talk through what damage had been done to them. They talked through what it meant to be an enemy and what it meant to be a friend. Gradually, incrementally, they began to shorten the distance, you see, between their enemies and themselves. He reported that not many of his patients were able to then have a very small body of water where they were very close and they could actually see their face. What Robert Coles is teaching us is this is an incremental ethic. It's an ethic that happens as you and I live into our baptismal covenant, day by day by day. And what's the central question that Dr. Coles invites us to ask each day? By my life and by my actions, am I life-giving or death-dealing? That's a question that you and I can begin to ask again tomorrow and the next day and next week and next month. When you and I wake every morning, we know that we have some enmity with our brothers and sisters, is to begin to ask myself, by my actions today, by my behaviors, by my words, am I life-giving or am I death-dealing? A long time ago in second grade, Billy Brown gave me daily beatings. My brother's ethic was, if he hits you, hit him harder. Take him down. Jesus comes along in all of those circumstances and says, I've got a new way. I've got another ethic. I want you to love your enemies. I want you to do good to those who do you wrong. I want you to bless those who curse you. I want you to pray for those who abuse you. Amen.